Some criminals act on violence while others use their brains. One might argue that the smartest criminals are those that have never been caught before or even heard about. There are some well-known criminals who handled their horrendous acts in a very clever way or were just intelligent people with a high IQ. Number 10. Bernie Madoff. A successful investment advisor, financier, and market maker, Bernie Madoff was also one of the biggest fraudsters of modern times. In 1960, he founded a stock brokerage which over the years grew into a large enterprise. Madoff remained its chairman until his arrest, and many top positions were filled by his immediate family members. However, Madoff founded the entire company on the basis of one multi-billion Ponzi scheme. In a standard Ponzi scheme, earlier investors get paid with the funds coming from newer investors, while enterprise keeps up the appearance of a successful business. And though Madoff was not the one who invented the scheme, his investment fraud was the largest of such kind. Madoff was arrested in 2009 after his sons, who worked in the company, alerted the FBI of their father's doings. Madoff pleaded guilty, and with 11 federal felonies to his credit, was sentenced to the maximum allowed time of 150 years in prison. While he claimed that his fraud scheme started in the 1990s, investigators believe that it went back into the 1980s and might have begun as early as the 1970s, swindling his clients out of billions for over 30 years. Number 9. Richard Loeb. A son of a wealthy lawyer, Richard Loeb was considered a very gifted child from his early years. His IQ is estimated at over 150. This explains why he skipped several grades at school, which subsequently led to isolation from his classmates who were all older than him. Whether due to lack of friends or other reasons, Loeb started fascinating about a life of crime in which he could live. He was also fascinated by the concept of supermen developed by Nietzsche and thought himself to be one such human, being above others and not governed by standard laws. He became the youngest graduate of the University of Michigan at 17. During his university years, he became close with Nathan Leopold, who had the same fascination with the idea of superior humans. Together, they committed several petty crimes but were dissatisfied with the lack of coverage in media. To get the recognition they thought their intelligence deserved, they planned and carried out what they called a perfect crime: the murder of Loeb's teenage cousin Bobby Franks. Unfortunately for them, their perfect crime wasn't as perfect as they imagined it. After Bobby's parents put the police on the case, they were able to find some evidence that pointed to both Loeb and Leopold. It was only a matter of time before they both confessed. Number 8. Rodney Alcala. Rodney Alcala studied film under a famous filmmaker, Roman Polanski, and was believed to have an IQ over 160. However, in addition to this gift, at his trials, he was diagnosed with a bunch of personality disorders, psychopathy, and sadism. Throughout his life, Alcala had tortured, raped, and killed a number of young women and underage girls, and police believe that not all his victims have been found and identified until today. Another crime he was held accountable for was a whole portfolio of women and teenage boys in sexually explicit positions Alcala took posing as a professional fashion photographer. And while police think that some of these so-called models may also be connected to cold cases, most of them remain unidentified. The most peculiar thing about Alcala is that in 1978, in the midst of his murder spree, he appeared on a TV show, The Dating Game, and actually won a date with a female participant. After the show, the latter refused to honor the commitment on the pretext that Alcala gave her a creepy vibe. Given his history with women, this decision might have just saved the girl's life. After his crimes were exposed to the public, Alcala was nicknamed the Dating Game Killer. As of now, he continues to serve his sentence. Number 7. Mamaru Somagochi. Not all crimes are shockingly violent. Some of them are just a case of clever marketing. One example is Japanese composer Mamaru Somagochi. Video game enthusiasts might have heard his music in Resident Evil Dual Shock and Amnushu Warlords. Somagochi claimed to have completely lost his hearing, but continued to compose nonetheless. It was only a matter of time before the modern media drew the parallel and dubbed him Digital Age Beethoven. In 2013, a journalist interviewing Somagochi in his apartment noticed certain inconsistencies in his behavior, pointing at the composer having no impairments. Therefore, it doesn't stop here. When Somagochi's first symphony was first publicly performed, a fellow composer noticed an obvious adaptation of some lesser-known works of earlier composers. The story took several years to be made public, to finally reveal that not only was Somagochi completely healthy, but he wasn't the author of any of the works bearing his name. His ghostwriter, Takashi Nagaki, was eager to confirm that for the past 18 years, he was the one who created all Somagochi's work. Number 6. Nathan Leopold. The other part of the Loeb and Leopold criminal duo, Nathan Leopold was slightly older than his partner and also a child prodigy. Unlike Loeb, who was interested in history, Leopold studied ornithology and became somewhat a recognized scientist in this field. He was equally carried away by the idea of superior humans and participated in the abduction and murder of Bobby Franks to prove their invincibility. To send the police off on the wrong track, they hatched a plan to demand a ransom after Franks was already murdered. After they were arrested, both Leopold and Loeb blamed each other for placing the fatal blow on the boy. In 1924, both were sentenced to a lifetime in prison for murder and an additional 99 years for kidnapping. Loeb died in prison 12 years into his term, Leopold continuing his life in prison, and was released in 1958 on parole after several unsuccessful petitions. Number 5. Victor Lustig. If you think that all scandalous crimes were committed in our days, let us take you back to the beginning of the 20th century, when Victor Lustig lived and carried out his cons. Another gifted child, Lustig became a gambler at the age of 19. Later, he used his talents to become a full-time con man. While he committed a series of cons throughout his career, he eventually entered history as the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice. In 1925, inspired by a newspaper article about the troubles Paris faced to maintain the Eiffel Tower, Lustig developed his most famous con. He'd meet wealthy businessmen as a corrupt government agent and convince them to buy the Eiffel Tower before the city administration sold it as metal scrap. Hard to believe, but one businessman fell for the story and closed the deal with Lustig. However, Lustig tried to pull the same thing again. The police were tipped off, and Lustig had to flee to the US, where he continued his crimes and was later arrested and died in prison of pneumonia. Number 4. Gregory McGregor. If selling the Eiffel Tower isn't impressive enough, think about selling an entire land to a large group of people. In 1822, Gregory McGregor announced himself Prince of Poya in Honduras. McGregor described his country as nothing short of a promised land with fertile soil and gold in the riverbed. All it lacked, as McGregor said, were people who'd invest in its development. He spared no effort advertising Poya in newspapers and even published a book about the small island under an alias. Scottish people, wary of their country's gloomy climate and rocky terrain, responded. His enterprise was so successful that McGregor printed his own money, while his market value plummeted to £1.3 million, about $3.6 billion in today's money. After the first 2 ships crossed the Atlantic, they only found a wasteland. Left with no means for existence, resettlers began to die. Only 1/3 of them were rescued by a passing ship. British Navy managed to recall the remaining 5 ships before they reached the island. McGregor fled to France, but soon tried to carry out the same scheme. French authorities became suspicious when an overwhelming number of people applied for permission to travel to an unknown land. The con was exposed and McGregor had to flee again. He died in Venezuela in 1845. Number 3. Karl Gergasian. This name is not particularly well known outside the law enforcement system, but Karl Gergasian's cases were still pretty spectacular. Gergasian robbed banks and did so with meticulous planning and attention to detail. He was first arrested when attempting to rob a candy shop at the age of 15. After being released, he went on to study electrical engineering, followed by a degree in statistics and probability, and even served in the army. Some law representatives believe that after his juvenile crime, Gergasian thought he'd never be able to find a proper job, so he turned to the life of crime. He always committed his robberies on Fridays, chose banks with very specific locations simplifying his escape, and took every possible measure to hide his identity. This strategy proved successful, allowing Gergasian to rob over 50 banks within 30 years. He was captured only because one of his stashes was found by children playing in the woods. Gergasian cooperated and got his initial sentence of 115 years reduced to 17. He was released in 2017 and is considered the most prolific bank robber in American history. Number 2. Hassan and Abbas O. This story sounds less like a police case and more like a heist movie. In 2009, 3 masked men entered a Berlin department store through a skylight on the 7th floor and took over $6.8 million worth of jewelry. After their escape, the only thing the police could find was a single latex glove. The extracted DNA matched with that of identical twins, Hassan and Abbas O. Their full name can't be revealed under German law. And though the glove directly pointed at one of the brothers, investigators failed to determine which one, thus being powerless to detain any of them. With the twins not commenting regarding their participation and their third accomplice never found, the court had no other way but to let them go. If perfect crime exists, this one is very close to it. Number 1. Ted Kaczynski. Nicknamed Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski began his career as a mathematician. A highly intelligent person, he later resorted to a very simplistic lifestyle in a cabin in Montana. It was there that Kaczynski started revolting against modern technology and the destruction of nature by way of conducting bombings throughout the country between 1978 and 1995. He targeted people involved with modern technology. He mailed or hand-delivered bombs that caused the death of 3 and injury of 23 people. In his essay Industrial Society and Its Future, Kaczynski argued that his bombings were extreme, but necessary to draw attention to how modern technologies destroyed human dignity. He was arrested in 1996 after his essay was published and his brother recognized the writing style. Kaczynski holds a dubious honor of being the subject of the longest and most expensive FBI investigations. In 1998, he pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to lifetime incarceration without the possibility of parole. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment down below and let us know what we should feature next. Don't forget to subscribe for new and upcoming episodes.